Do you ever wonder where the time goes? You look up from a piece of work or a good conversation and you think, gee, where did the time go? So it turns out that one place the time goes is to a hospital. Every minute, every hour that you lose track of during a day finds its way to a hospital where somebody sits and waits that time for you. For a long time, my mother was in the hospital because she was very sick. She had tumors in her brain. And to treat this, she had 2 brain surgeries, 3 kinds of radiation, and some aggressive steroid therapy. During much of this, she was confined to a hospital bed. She had a small room with a window. On the sill, there were sort of flowers and cards from friends, although after the treatment, Mom couldn't actually see that far from her bed. There was a nightstand next to the table, next to the bed, and there was a green chair in the corner. It was vinyl, squishy, and it reclined if you wanted to stay the night. While she was being treated, my father and I spent 12 hours a day with her. We took it in 6-hour shifts. The shifts were very boring. I would go for a walk, check my phone, read a book. But it's hard not to focus on what's happening to Mom. And so, inevitably I would spend hours just sitting there and waiting for something to happen. This is where you feel the waiting. Most of the time, every day, Mom would wake up. And I would say, "Hi, there you are. How's it going?" And she would sort of blink a bit. And I would say, "Did you have a good little napper?" And she would, she couldn't talk at this point. She would kind of move her mouth. And I would say, should we keep reading from your book? Would you like that? And she would blink or move her mouth, and I don't know what that means. But I presumed it mean yes, we should keep reading the book. So I get my mom's favorite book from the night table, and I would continue reading from where we left off. His mouth covered hers. Waking her out of a half dream and into fresh passion. He wanted her just as much, now that he knew what they could make between them, but with a fire that held steady on slow burn. This time, though desire was still keen, the madness was less intense. He could appreciate the subtle curves, the soft angles, the lazy sighs he could draw out of her with only a touch. It was like making love to some primitive goddess, naked but for the gold draped over her skin. After so long a thirst, he quenched himself slowly. Leisurely. After that first greedy gulp. So Mom's favorite author is Nora Roberts. Some of you clearly know Nora. She is the author of over 200 best-selling romance novels. The plots feature female protagonists in familial and romantic entanglements. This one is called the Stanislavski Sisters, and the plot is thus. Stormy Natasha's wild, fiery beauty captivates Spencer Kimball. But will the handsome single dad prove the one man capable of breaching her well-fortified heart and taming Natasha? Mom had hundreds of these books in our house, and we grabbed a couple and brought them into the hospital to read to her. And so most days, if she woke up, she would lie there looking at me because I pointed her head in my direction. And I would sort of read at her these fiery these thinly veiled descriptions of Natasha's sexual emancipation. Do you remember when you were a kid and you watch films with your parents and a sex scene comes on, right, and it gets quiet? And you want to leave the room, but you can't because it would be so obvious, right? So imagine doing that, except you're narrating the sex scene to your parents. Eventually, it got so bad that I would read with one eye on the page upcoming, and I would just, if it seemed a little bit sexy, I would just skip the entire page and hope that Mom didn't notice. This is the part where I tell you that Mom didn't have a private room at the hospital. So, day after day, I would sit in the green, squishy chair, and I would read to Mom for as long as she was awake, if she woke up. Sometimes 10 minutes, sometimes an hour. You know, and the hospital goes on. People walk by outside. Nurses would come in and out of the room. Mom's food, ominously, largely untouched. So after a couple of weeks of reading these stories to Mom, I started to recall that actually I had read some of these books before. When I was 12 or 13, I somehow discovered that these books that are around our house had these descriptions of sex in them. And Mom didn't just have romance novels. She had like Harlequin pulp. Like bodice rippers with like Fabio on the cover and like busty damsels, and so I would sneak around the house and I would surreptitiously read the sexy bits in the novels. I have to tell you that some of my first erections, which means my mom and I were getting. So I don't think this revelation is so much strange or weird as it is significant. You know, it's a real thing to start to see your parents as people, you know, like you and I are people, and not as some mythological being called a parent, right? I think we all realize this at different times. You know, up until this point, I thought my parents had sex exactly 2 times. I have a sister. And I never imagined that my mom would have had this sort of vital and vibrant and apparently quite tumescent emotional life. the irony, I suppose, or the tragedy is that I realized this about my mom long after that part of her life was dark. By this point, in her time in the hospital, even if I'd wanted to ask her about her life as a sexual being, probably would not have understood the question and certainly could not articulate a response. So it goes. So instead, we just read these novels, day after day, passing time, waiting for my dad to show up for his 6-hour shift. Thanks.